In the jump from Endless Space 1 to Endless Space 2, 4 factions were transferred over: United Empire, Sophons, Cravers, and Horatio. That is what I'm going to be doing here, taking 4 factions from Endless Legend 1, and trying to imagine how they'd fit into its sequel. I'll be taking inspiration from all over the place, but I'll be tackling this from a narrative focus mainly because, well, I'm a writer. So let's start with a narrative question. What is happening in Endless Legend? Well, Auriga is being terraformed into an ice planet, and its inhabitants don't like that. So what's doing the terraforming? Well, what about a behemoth? Obviously, the inhabitants don't know what a behemoth is, but they can tell from the changing world around them that things are changing after it showed up. In fact, there's a faction in Endless Legend who already knows what's happening to Auriga, the cultists of the Eternal End. But there was a schism. The cult argued about what the people of Auriga should do, and in doing so, they argued to the point of violence. Their queen was killed, their capital burned, and the survivors went their separate ways, determined to find rulers with the power and ambition to determine the fate of the world. During your faction's main quest, you come across 3 different cultists, and at the midpoint of the story, you must decide which you side with, the future of your faction, and which victory condition you want to pursue. These 3 victory conditions are: 1. Get as many people off the planet as you can, the science victory. 2. Reach and survive the final winter, the military/score victory. 3. Construct a giant dust cannon and blow up the moon, or the wonder, economic, and diplomatic victory. I think it's up in the air for me whether you should or should not be able to commit to a single objective. But narratively, I think that these ideas about what to do become so entrenched within your empire that they take on religious undertones. The demands being placed on your society becoming so massive that any faction who believes in a different vision are traitors whose resources could be taken to more useful efforts. And let's start this off by talking about the angry ant bees, the Necrophage. And the Necrophage know only war. Not because they can't wait to attack you, but because the concept of a ceasefire is incomprehensible. From the very beginning, you need to fight. You don't start with a hero with a Necrophage. Instead, you start with 4 foragers and a queen, the Necrophage settler. In order to settle a city as the Necrophage, you need to be adjacent to either a destroyed minor faction village, an already established Necrophage city, to become another district, or the ruins of another city, and you always happen to spawn adjacent to a minor faction village. After defeating the village and founding your city with a queen, you settle your first city. Necrophage start off as hunter-gatherers, a trait which reduces their fizzy exploitation by 1, but grants an additional exploitation range, increasing the number of exploited tiles from 6 to 18, which gives them a serious amount of early tempo as long as it isn't winter. Destroyed villages also provide a lot of flat food that lets Necrophage cities grow very quickly, as well as slowly assimilating their population into your stomach. In order to really sell the idea of a growing, expanding swarm, Necrophage cities spawn new queens after they gain enough population, like ants or bees. This means that it's very easy for necrophages to expand around the map. But there are several systems that limit that growth. First is housing. I'm going to suggest returning to Endless Space's pop system here, with each population creating a small amount of fizzy. Unhoused population provides only a fraction of the fizzy that housed pops do, and they also cost twice their amenities, the second growth limiter. Amenities are a percentage modifier to your yields based on the ratio between the city's amenities and amenity needs. Sort of what happiness already is, except far more dynamic. The third limiter is migration, in which growth is distributed from unhappy cities with no housing to happier cities with housing. The fourth limiter is your influence. All cities cost influence per turn, reflecting the baseline influence you need to tell your population to do the things you want them to do. If you can't afford to do that, they'll start rebelling against you. The fifth is your manpower draft. In Endless Space 2, they added the manpower system, which takes a percentage of your food and turns it into manpower which can be used to invade enemy systems. Humankind also has a system where units actually cost significantly less production, but also cost a certain amount of population as well. What I want to explore here is what if 1 manpower was equal to 1 HP? A 100 HP unit, therefore, would need to be supplied with 100 manpower. The baseline conversion of food to MP in Endless Space 2 is 20%, So 100 HP would mean converting 500 food into 100 manpower, as well as 400 food used to grow. But necrophages have a baseline conversion of 50%, so half your growth is being funneled into your military, giving you an endless supply of cheap swarm units. Speaking of which, let's talk about military. Each faction has its own 6-unit roster, more akin to Heroes of Might and Magic, in exchange for losing your multiple weapon options. This also increases the value of assimilating minor factions, a core design pillar of Endless Legend that I want to push further. But there is another design pillar that I want to move away from, which is the industry cost and the gold upkeep that thoroughly dominates the 4X genre. Instead, I'm going to suggest having 4 resources be relevant to your military, and I will be exploring this concept throughout the series. First is our aforementioned manpower, and having a lot of manpower means you get to have a lot of bodies on the field, and being able to replenish those numbers. Second is industry, which is about building the weapons and armor for those soldiers to use. The third is experience, which is an attempt to simulate the choice between elites and conscript forces. The fourth is dust, which is what your mages actually consume in order to shield themselves and attack. As an angry, expanding swarm, the Necrophage are designed around having a massive military, which means that their experience is divided up amongst all of them, leading to a very unskilled conscript force. But what if you don't want to be the evil swarm as the Necrophage, and get on with your neighbors? Well, one of the victory paths, the Cannon Victory, lets you do just that. The Cannon Victory is very much geared towards players who want to cooperate in a giant alliance, even in multiplayer. But I still want there to be tensions inside alliance structures, especially when it comes to trade treaties and routes. Trade treaties no longer create dust out of thin air. Instead, you trade actual resources which the other side has to pay for with dust, including food, migration access, industry, science, as well as strategic and luxury access. You also need the influence to sustain those treaties, and those that don't have enough influence can easily be battered around in the diplomatic scene. Which is why you might actually want to make sure that your military is developed enough so that you can have a chance to alter those deals. Building and fueling a giant cannon to blow up the moon will require more than what your hunter-gatherers can produce. So the cannon cultist sets out how he thinks it can be done. First, the Necrophage must abandon their hunter-gatherer past and trait, and start to understand what it means to engage diplomatically with other factions. And that means rapidly educating the population, no matter the cost. After that is using the only asset that the Necrophage really have in the diplomatic scene, their population. So they start exporting it. By signing a migration treaty with another empire, Necrophage pops can now go elsewhere outside of their cramped, overpopulated hives. But that's a bad thing, right? Giving away all of your precious population. Well, they'd send money back home, which means that Necrophage pops abroad send dust back to the hive, which can be used to purchase structures, and charge up the cannon, while the lower growth lets you manage the enormous strain on your amenities, which otherwise would dramatically reduce your city yields. With a reason to be diplomatic and a way to generate the massive amount of dust required to fire the cannon, what's left is to control the planned cannon construction site along Orgo's equator, which you can gain either through conquest, or if you're allied with a friendly empire who controls that province, by supplying production towards that goal. Just don't ask about what happens after you deorbit a moon. And that's what I have for the Necrophages. Stay tuned as I next talk about the Volters.